The old boiler room at Fairview Country Club smelled like rust and floor wax. That was where Walter Combs spent most of his mornings, long before the members arrived in their pressed white polos and expensive sunglasses. Nobody at Fairview knew his last name. To them, he was just the janitor, an old man with a limp, gray stubble and eyes that never seemed to blink at the right moments. He mopped floors. He fixed leaking faucets. He carried trash bags out to the dumpster before sunrise, when the golf carts were still lined up in silence. He was 71 years old, quiet, polite, almost invisible. That morning, the sun had barely cleared the tree line when the first complaint came in. "Can you move faster?" A man in a crisp blue blazer snapped, stepping around Walter's mop bucket like it was contaminated. "Some of us have a tea time." Walter said nothing. He simply nodded and pulled the bucket aside, but the man wasn't finished. "Honestly," he said, loud enough for the lobby to hear, "how do they still let guys like this work here? Can barely keep up." A few members chuckled. One woman recorded a few seconds of video on her phone, giggling under her breath as if this was entertainment. Walter kept his head down and kept mopping, his hands steady, his breathing calm. He had heard worse, much worse. By mid-morning, the humiliation escalated. Someone accidentally, or not so accidentally, knocked over a supply cart. Cleaning bottles rolled across the marble floor. Nobody helped him pick them up. A teenager filmed it, laughing, tagging the video, "Old man down again." Walter knelt slowly, joint stiff, and gathered his things without a word. That was when a black SUV pulled into the club's circular driveway. The doors opened, and out stepped a broad-shouldered man in a fitted gray suit, dark sunglasses, and the unmistakable posture of someone who had spent years standing at attention. He walked with purpose, each step measured, like a man who had trained his body to move without wasted motion. He was here for a corporate golf outing. Nothing more, just another guest. But something happened the moment he crossed the lobby threshold. His eyes locked onto the old janitor kneeling on the floor, calmly collecting scattered bottles while people laughed around him. The stranger stopped walking. He tilted his head slightly, studying the old man's hands. The way they moved, precise and practiced, like they had done far more delicate work than mopping floors. Then his gaze drifted upward to the old man's forearm, a faded tattoo, half hidden beneath a rolled sleeve. The stranger's expression shifted, just slightly. His jaw tightened. Nobody else in the room noticed. But he did, and what he said next would freeze the entire lobby in silence. The stranger's voice cut through the noise like a blade through fog. "Commander?" The word landed heavy in the marble lobby. A few members turned, confused. The teenager lowered her phone. Walter froze for half a second, just half a second, before continuing to gather the fallen bottles as if nothing had happened. "I think you had me confused with someone else," Walter said quietly, not looking up. But the stranger didn't move. He crouched down beside him, ignoring his expensive suit pressing against the dirty floor, and looked directly into Walter's eyes. "Fallujah," he said. 2007. Walter's hand stopped moving. For the first time that morning, something flickered behind his tired eyes. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something deeper, something buried. The lobby had gone completely silent now. Even the man in the blue blazer, who minutes ago had been mocking Walter loudly, stood frozen, sensing that something important was happening, something far beyond his understanding. The stranger extended a hand, steady and firm. "Petty Officer First Class Daniel Reyes," he said. "Navy SEAL, 3rd Platoon." Walter stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took it. "You've got the wrong man," Walter said, his voice low, almost pleading. "I'm just a janitor here." But Reyes shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving Walter's face. "I'd know that face anywhere," he said. "You pulled me out of a burning Humvee. You carried me 200 yards under fire. I was 19 years old." A woman near the front desk gasped audibly. The teenager who had been filming lowered her phone completely. Her earlier laughter replaced with something like shame creeping across her face. Walter's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened just slightly, but he blinked it away quickly, the way a man does when he's trained himself for decades not to show weakness in public. That was a long time ago, Walter said softly. Not long enough for me to forget, Reyes replied. Not long enough for me to forget the man who saved my life and then disappeared. The room seemed to hold its breath. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the club manager, who had come out to see what the commotion was about, stood frozen in the doorway, sensing that the world around him had just shifted in a way he couldn't fully explain. The man in the blue blazer, who had mocked Walter just an hour earlier, took a small step backward, his face pale, his earlier confidence completely gone. Because the man he had humiliated, the man he called slow, incompetent, unworthy, was being addressed by a decorated Navy SEAL with more respect than he had ever shown to anyone in his life. But this was only the beginning, because what Reyes said next would reveal something that nobody in that lobby, not even Walter himself, expected to hear again. You disappeared after the ceremony, Reyes said. Nobody could find you. I looked for years. Walter's throat tightened. He looked down at the floor, at the scattered bottles still waiting to be picked up, as if the mess in front of him was easier to face than the memory being pulled to the surface. There was no ceremony I wanted to attend, Walter said quietly. Reyes frowned, confused. They gave you the Silver Star, Commander. You didn't show up. A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. The word Commander seemed to echo off the marble walls. Nobody understood yet what it meant, but everyone understood it meant something. Walter finally rose to his feet, slower than usual, his knee cracking softly. He steadied himself against the supply cart, the same cart that had been knocked over just an hour earlier by careless hands. I didn't earn a medal that day, Walter said. I lost 3 men that day. The medal never felt like something to celebrate. The lobby fell into a heavier silence. Reyes stood up beside him, his posture straightening instinctively, the way soldiers do around someone they respect deeply. You saved 6 of us, Reyes said. I was one of them. Walter's eyes closed briefly, just for a moment, long enough for decades of memory to pass behind his eyelids. The club manager stepped forward hesitantly. I didn't know, he stammered. Walter never mentioned any of this. Ever. That's because he wasn't supposed to, Reyes said, glancing at the manager with a firmness that made the man take another step back. Men like him don't talk about it. They just carry it. The teenager who had filmed the earlier video slowly deleted it from her phone, her hands trembling slightly. Nobody told her to. She simply understood, somewhere deep inside, that what she had captured wasn't something to laugh at. The woman who had recorded Walter tripping earlier lowered her eyes to the floor, unable to hold his gaze. But the man in the blue blazer, the one who had mocked him the loudest, stood there, stiff, searching for words that wouldn't come. Reyes turned toward him, his voice calm but pointed. You called him slow, Reyes said. He carried 200 pounds of gear and a wounded man through gunfire without slowing down once. I don't think you understand what slow means. The man opened his mouth, then closed it again, saying nothing. Walter placed a gentle hand on Reyes' shoulder, the way an older brother might calm a younger one. That's enough, Walter said softly. It's in the past. But Reyes shook his head. Not for me it isn't. And then, almost as if summoned by the moment itself, an older man stepped through the front doors of the club, silver-haired, walking with a cane, wearing a faded veteran's cap. He stopped the instant he saw Walter's face. His cane nearly slipped from his hand. Combs, the old man whispered, his voice cracking. Walter Combs. Walter turned toward the voice, and for the first time all morning, something like real emotion broke through his calm composure. Frank, Walter said quietly. Frank Delaney. The old man in the veteran's cap crossed the lobby slowly, his cane tapping against the marble floor, each step echoing through the silent room. When he reached Walter, he didn't offer a handshake. He wrapped his arms around him instead, holding on tightly, the way men do when words aren't enough. I thought you were dead, Frank said, his voice thick with tears. After Fallujah, after everything, nobody could find you. I told your family you were a hero. I told them what you did. Walter's hands trembled slightly as he returned the embrace. I didn't want to be found, Walter admitted. Not after what happened. The club manager, the members, Even the staff who had gathered near the front desk stood in stunned silence, watching two old soldiers hold on to each other in the middle of the golf club lobby that, just an hour earlier, had been a place of mockery and quiet cruelty. Frank stepped back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, and looked at the small crowd gathered around them. "You people have no idea who this man is," Frank said, his voice rising slightly, not out of anger but out of protective pride. Commander Walter Combs led the rescue mission that pulled 6 wounded Marines out of a collapsed compound during an ambush in Fallujah. He went back in 3 times. 3 times, when he had every reason to stay behind. The room seemed to shrink around Walter, every eye now fixed on him. "The building was on fire," Frank continued, his voice lower now, almost reverent. "Enemy fire was coming from 2 directions. Most men would have pulled back after the first trip. Walter didn't. He said he wasn't leaving anyone behind." Walter stared at the floor, his jaw tight, his eyes distant, as if he were standing back in that burning building instead of a quiet country club lobby. "We lost Dawson and Reyes spotted that day," Walter said softly. "I couldn't save everyone. I've never stopped thinking about the ones I couldn't reach." The lobby was utterly silent now. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed too loud. Reyes placed a firm hand on Walter's shoulder. "You saved 6 of us, Commander. That's 6 families who still have their sons, their husbands, their fathers, because of you." Walter didn't respond right away. His eyes glistened, and for the first time that morning, he allowed a single tear to fall, wiping it away quickly, almost embarrassed by the display. The man in the blue blazer, who had mocked him just hours earlier, slowly lowered himself onto a nearby bench, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. He finally understood the weight of what he had done. But nobody in that room was prepared for what Walter said next, the words that would explain everything and change how they saw him forever. Walter took a deep breath, steadying himself the way he had learned to do decades ago, in moments far more dangerous than this one. "It was August," he said, "hot enough to boil the paint off the trucks. We got word the squad was pinned down inside a collapsed building near the edge of the city. Structural fire. Enemy fire. No clear exit." The lobby stood frozen, hanging on every word. "I wasn't supposed to go in," Walter continued. "I was a corpsman. My job was to patch people up, not lead a rescue. But the officer in charge was down. Somebody had to make the call." Frank nodded slowly beside him, his eyes glassy, as if reliving the memory alongside him. "So I made it," Walter said. "I told the men to stay back, and I went in alone the first time." Reyes' voice was barely above a whisper. "You didn't tell anyone what you found in there." Walter shook his head. "Wasn't anything worth telling. Just smoke and men who needed help." He described it plainly, without exaggeration, the way soldiers often do. Not because the memory was small, but because the weight of it didn't need decoration. The ceiling had partially caved in. 2 Marines were trapped beneath fallen beams, choking on smoke, one with a shattered leg. Gunfire was still coming from a nearby rooftop. Walter crawled to the debris, found the first man, and dragged him out to a side opening barely wide enough for a body to fit through. He went back in a second time for the man with the broken leg, splinting it with a rifle strap and a piece of wood before hauling him over his shoulder. The 3rd time, he went back for Reyes. "You were unconscious," Walter said, looking at him now. "Your leg was pinned under a support beam. I didn't think I'd get you out in time." Reyes swallowed hard. "But you did." "Barely," Walter said. "The building came down almost completely about 90 seconds after I pulled you clear." A woman near the front desk covered her mouth with her hand, her earlier laughter now feeling like a distant, shameful memory. "Dawson didn't make it," Walter said quietly. "He was still inside when the building collapsed. I couldn't get back in time." The room absorbed the weight of that sentence in silence. "I carry that with me every day," Walter admitted. "Not the medal, not the title. Just them, just the ones I couldn't save." Frank placed a hand gently on Walter's back. "You saved 6 men that day, Walter. Nobody blames you for the one you couldn't reach. Nobody except yourself." Walter didn't answer. His eyes were distant, fixed somewhere beyond the marble floor, beyond the country club, back in a burning building half a world away. But what happened next will remind everyone in that lobby, including Walter himself, that some legacies never truly disappear. A long silence stretched through the lobby. Nobody rushed to fill it. Even the club manager, usually quick to smooth over awkward moments with polite chatter, stood still, unwilling to interrupt something that felt sacred. Then, from the back entrance, a soft jingle of a collar broke the quiet. A golden retriever, wearing a faded service vest, padded into the lobby beside an older woman in a wheelchair. The dog stopped abruptly the moment it caught Walter's scent, ears perking up, tail wagging with sudden, unmistakable recognition. Before anyone could react, the dog crossed the room and sat directly in front of Walter, nudging his hand gently with its nose. Walter's expression softened instantly. He knelt down, ignoring the ache in his knees, and rested his palm on the dog's head. "Hey, Scout," he whispered. The woman in the wheelchair, a retired Army nurse named Colonel Ruth Hensley, wheeled herself closer, disbelief written across her face. "Walter Combs," she said slowly. "I treated men you brought in. I remember your hands. Steadiest hands I ever saw in a field hospital." Walter gave a small, tired smile. Didn't think anyone would remember an old corpseman. "Nobody who worked beside you forgets," Ruth said firmly. The dog leaned into Walter's touch, calm and content, as if some invisible bond had simply picked up where it left off years ago. Reyes looked around the lobby, at the members who had mocked Walter just hours earlier, now standing in stunned, humbled silence. "You want to know something?" Reyes said, his voice carrying across the room. "This man never told any of us his name after the medal ceremony he skipped. He walked away from every reunion, every interview request, every article that tried to write about him." He turned to Walter. "Why?" Walter took a moment before answering, his eyes still on the dog beneath his hand. "Because the ones who didn't come home don't get interviews," he said quietly. "Didn't feel right, me getting attention for surviving." The room absorbed his words in heavy silence. The man in the blue blazer finally stood up from the bench, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine shame. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice unsteady. "I had no idea. I judged you without knowing anything about you." Walter looked up at him, his expression calm, without a trace of resentment. "You didn't know," Walter said simply. "Most people don't. That's not really your fault." The man swallowed hard, clearly expecting anger, clearly unprepared for grace. "That's not an excuse," he said. "I was cruel, in front of everyone. I'm sorry." Walter nodded slowly, accepting the apology without making a show of it. But as the tension in the room began to ease, Reyes suddenly turned toward the door, his expression shifting. Because outside, pulling into the driveway, was a car nobody in that lobby expected to see. A dark green sedan rolled to a stop outside the club entrance, its government plates catching the morning light. The driver stepped out first, opening the rear door with practiced formality. An older man emerged slowly, tall despite his age, wearing a simple navy blazer with a small pin on the lapel that most people wouldn't recognize. But Frank recognized it instantly. So did Reyes. "That's Admiral Whitfield," Frank said under his breath, straightening instinctively. The Admiral walked to the front doors with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to be announced. His eyes swept the lobby briefly before landing on Walter. He stopped mid-stride. For a long moment, he simply stared, as if making sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. "Combs," he said finally, his voice steady but touched with disbelief. "I heard a rumor this morning that made me get in the car without finishing my coffee." Walter straightened slightly, old habits surfacing despite the years. "Admiral." "Don't Admiral me," Whitfield said, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea how long the Navy has been trying to locate you?" Walter shook his head slowly. "Didn't think anyone was looking." "We've been looking for 12 years, Whitfield said. "You vanished after declining the ceremony. No forwarding address. No contact. Your file's been sitting on my desk, collecting dust, because nobody could close it." The lobby, already stunned into silence, seemed to hold its breath even tighter. "There's a reason I came looking today," Whitfield continued. "Reyes called me an hour ago. Said he thought he found you. I didn't believe him until I saw your face just now. Walter's jaw tightened. I wasn't hiding, sir. I was just living quietly. Whitfield studied him for a long moment, his expression softening. You saved my nephew's life that day in Fallujah. Petty Officer Marcus Whitfield. He's got 2 kids now. Wouldn't exist without you. Walter blinked, clearly not expecting that detail. Marcus, good kid. Didn't know he was your nephew. Neither did I know you were mopping floors at a golf club, Whitfield said, a faint, sad smile crossing his face. A man who should have a boat named after him is scrubbing marble instead. A soft murmur moved through the small crowd still gathered nearby, disbelief and shame mixing together on their faces. Whitfield turned toward the room, his voice carrying the weight of command even in casual conversation. This man, he said, declined not 1 but 2 commendation ceremonies. He asked that any recognition be given instead to the families of the men who didn't make it home. That request was honored. His name was quietly removed from public records at his insistence. The club manager looked physically ill, realizing the man he employed to clean toilets and mop floors had refused honors most soldiers dream of receiving. He didn't do it for the missing recognition, Whitfield said. He did it because he never believed he deserved to stand taller than the men who didn't come home. Walter lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with the attention, uncomfortable with being seen so clearly after years of quiet invisibility. But Whitfield wasn't finished. Not yet, because there was one more thing he had come to say, something that would change everything for Walter, whether he wanted it or not. Whitfield reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, worn slightly at the corners, as if it had traveled a long way to get here. I've been carrying this in my desk drawer for 11 years, he said, holding it out toward Walter, waiting for the day I could hand it to you personally. Walter stared at the box, but didn't reach for it. Sir, I already told the Navy. I know what you told the Navy, Whitfield interrupted gently, and I respected it. Nobody forced this on you back then. Nobody's forcing it now. He opened the box himself, revealing the silver star inside, its ribbon slightly faded from years of storage. But I'm not here as a Navy today, Whitfield said. I'm here as a man whose nephew is alive because of what you did, and I'm asking you, not ordering you, to let this room see who you really are, not for glory, for truth. The room was utterly silent, every eye fixed on the small box in the admiral's hand. Walter looked around slowly, at Reyes, at Frank, at Ruth in her wheelchair with Scout resting his head on her lap, at the members who had mocked him just hours earlier, now standing in humbled silence. He thought of Dawson. He thought of the men he couldn't save. He thought of the years he had spent trying to disappear into quiet, unremarkable work, believing that anonymity was a form of penance. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the box. For Dawson, Walter said quietly, not for me. Whitfield nodded, understanding completely. For Dawson, nobody in the lobby moved. Nobody spoke. The moment felt too fragile, too sacred to interrupt with applause or noise. Walter closed the box gently, holding it in both hands, the weight of it settling into something deeper than metal and ribbon. The man in the blue blazer, who had mocked him just hours earlier, stepped forward one last time, his voice quiet and sincere. Thank you, he said simply, for your service, and for teaching me something today I won't forget. Walter nodded, offering a small, tired smile. Just doing my job. Then and now. Slowly, the tension in the lobby began to soften into something warmer. Not celebration, but quiet respect, the kind that doesn't need loud words to be felt. Reyes placed a hand on Walter's shoulder one final time. You don't have to disappear anymore, Commander. Walter looked at him, at Frank, at Ruth, at Whitfield, and finally allowed himself something he hadn't allowed in years, a full, genuine smile. Maybe not, he said, but I've still got floors to clean. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the room, gentle and healing, breaking the heaviness that had settled over the lobby all morning. Walter picked up his mop, his cart now set back on its wheels by hands that, an hour earlier, had knocked it over without a second thought. Nobody stopped him. Nobody tried to give him a standing ovation or turn the moment into a spectacle. That wasn't who he was, and by now, everyone in that lobby understood it. He finished his shift the same way he started, quietly, steadily, without complaint. But something in the room had changed. The members who walked past him, without a glance, now nodded when they saw him. The teenager who had filmed him falling now offered to carry his supplies without being asked. The man in the blue blazer left a handwritten note at the front desk that afternoon, addressed simply to Commander Combs, thanking him again, this time in private, without an audience. Word spread quietly through the club over the following weeks, not through headlines or interviews, because Walter still refused those, just through quiet conversations, passed from one person to another, the way real respect often travels. Admiral Whitfield visited again the following month, this time not in uniform, just as a friend. He brought Marcus with him, the nephew Walter had saved all those years ago, now a father too, standing tall, holding his youngest daughter's hand. Marcus didn't say much. He didn't need to. He simply shook Walter's hand, held it a little longer than usual, and said, "Thank you for my kids' lives." Walter nodded, his eyes glistening, the way they had in the lobby weeks earlier. Rhea stayed in touch too, visiting on weekends sometimes, the two of them sitting quietly by the maintenance shed, talking about nothing important, the way old friends do when important things have already been said. Ruth brought Scout by every few weeks, letting the old dog rest beside Walter while he worked, a quiet companionship that needed no explanation. Walter never asked for a promotion, never asked for special treatment, never let the club turn him into some kind of exhibit for wealthy members to admire from a distance. He kept mopping floors. He kept fixing leaking faucets. He kept showing up before sunrise, carrying trash bags out to the dumpster in the quiet dark. But now, when people passed him in the hallway, they saw him differently, not as an old janitor to be overlooked, but as a man who had carried others through fire, who had given up recognition to protect the memory of those who didn't make it home, and who found peace not in medals, but in quiet, honest work. Sometimes the people who deserve the most respect are the ones we walk past every day, assuming we already know their story. Sometimes courage doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up early in the morning, mop in hand, asking nothing in return. And sometimes the quietest people in the room have carried the heaviest weight of all. If stories like this remind you that quiet courage still exists, hidden behind ordinary faces, ordinary jobs, ordinary days, consider subscribing for more stories about hidden heroes. Because sometimes the people we overlook the most are the ones who once gave everything to make sure we never had to.